Well, today is Christmas. I guess it's actually a couple days after Christmas, but it's time to open some packages here and see whether we were naughty or nice. This strap mechanism here is good, not just for lifting the molds and such, but it also locks together the cope, cheek, and drag so that metal, liquid metal, so-called metallostatic pressure doesn't cause separation of the molds and leakage of metal. That can be a problem if molds are put together simply one piece stacked on top of the other, as is commonly done. In that case, a lot of times you end up having to put weights on the molds to keep them from lifting like that. But this system works pretty nicely to prevent that. About the only time I ever have run out of metal from a mold is if somehow I screw up closing the mold and there's a little bit of molding sand maybe along an edge that prevents full closure of the mold. That leaves a gap, of course, and this metal flows very well through even tiny gaps. So if you don't get your mold closed up, you end up being actually unable to fill it. You'll start to pour, and then you'll see, well, gee, why isn't the mold filling? It looks like it should be filling. And then you look around and see a bunch of smoke and steam from the far side of the mold, perhaps, where iron is leaking out. And you can keep on pouring forever, and it won't fill. Sometimes in large foundries, where you've got 2 or 3 people or more working, some brave worker can take a shovelful or a handful of sand, I've seen it done, and slap it up against the leaking area and stop the leak. But you gotta be kind of brave, or maybe even foolish, to do that, I think. And it's certainly not an option when I'm working by myself. You cannot start a pour, interrupt it, and then come back and complete a pour either, by the way, because the metal will not join properly. It'll form what's called a cold shut. Well, let's pull that cope off, see what happens. And you can see the different colored core sand here. I'm going to set that aside. This casting is actually still just a little bit warm. We'll take it up onto the bench in a little bit and take a little closer look. So far, it looks just fine. Let's do the same thing here. Works best if I start from not this end, but this end, since that sticks in the sand a little bit more than the free end here. So let's pull this up. And break the sand a little bit. It looks like it might loosen it up. There we go. And give you a look at the bottom. There we are. We'll take it up to the Molten bench and look a little bit closer and see better what we have. Well, I hope I've got you in the frame properly so that you can see this. By guess and by golly, I think it's maybe going to be right. Anyways, we'll break out some sand here. And one nice thing is it'll make visible the path that the iron took to get in here and the location of the riser. The sand gets pretty firm when it is exposed to all that heat, as you can see. But one really nice thing about those cores is look how they just fall out. Yeah, there's a little residual sand in there, sure enough. But you can see, maybe you can see flakes of shiny metal floating through the air here. I'll bring this up a little bit closer and you can probably see the sparkliness of the sand. That's actually shiny metal, and hopefully see that the finish on that inside of the casting is really quite nice. That's a feature of epoxy bound resin cores that I really like. The other thing I really like here is, of course, that everything is just the way we hoped. In terms of the letters, they're all nice and clear. There's no places where the iron didn't fill well, and there's only just a little bit of leakage of iron around the edges of the core. A little bit more so up on this side, but that'll break out easily too. That's all I'm going to do there. In the end, I'll go ahead and just grind that with my belt grinder. And again, up here, nice and smooth, everything's good. The finger groove is just fine. And here's the little recess that I was talking about that I didn't think people could see very well, that I carve into the mold so that in case there is any sand that should come down in here that would land down there. I don't see any sand that got down there, but you never know, and it's kind of nice to have that little piece of insurance. It doesn't take much to spoil a casting, and a lot of work to repeat, as you can see. So, to go over a little bit the path of the iron here, which may not be familiar to some folks who haven't been in the foundry or around the foundry very much. Here's the pouring basin that you could see I was pouring the iron into, obviously, and it came down through the sprue. Here's where that filter is, passed through the filter, and then into the down sprue. And then here's the part that we just hand carved in the drag that allowed for a channel from the down sprue over to the riser and gate. The gate is the area where the iron enters the actual mold cavity. So I'm glad to be able to show you that, and I'm really glad that the casting looks nice. Now, to get that, one of the very first things I'm going to do here probably is break off this part of this filling system. Let's see what happens here if I just... There we go. That gets that little bit out of the way, and then this piece will be remelted. It'll go back in the pot later on. Everything I melt is are returns, either from my foundry. This is considered a return because it's going to return to the melt, or most of the iron that I buy is returns from a commercial foundry that makes military casting, so they're very high grade raw materials that are used. Well, that's the first one. Let's take a look at the second one here, if you're still with me. And pretty much similar, I hope, in the sense that it'll be a complete casting. Here's that strong back that I used in the core. The first one I actually didn't have an extra strong back for, so I just embedded a couple of socket head cap screws, and that worked okay. That's the first time I've ever done that, but it worked out. Thought it would, and it did. And this is that core sand, and I just really like the fact that it's really soft and easily returned to the molding sand when we want to reuse it later. It won't be reused for core, obviously. It'll just be used for backing sand, but nevertheless, nice that it works the way it does. A lot of times sodium silicate bound cores are much harder and more difficult to crush up and get that sand back into the stream. So I won't belabor this one. I won't go through brushing it all off and everything, but we'll see that this one came through with flying colors too. So I guess Santa Claus was good to me this time. And again, I can see that things in here went well. You get to see that shiny metal floating around. And once I get that brushed out, maybe if I use a little compressed air on it, see what happens. Yeah, nice and clean too, just the way you'd hope. So I'm real pleased with these results. I wish I could say that it works out this well every time, and it does most of the time, but not always. Just enough. It messes up. I mess up just often enough to keep it interesting. Let's break this off too, and then we'll done what we can do here. There we go. And that will go to the returns as well. And then the gate, I have a decent sized horizontal bandsaw from the 50s actually, but quite a nice bandsaw that I refurbished. And I'll just bandsaw that gate off. If we didn't have this riser here, if we just filled straight into the mold, what happens is you can get shrinks right at the entry point of the gate into the mold. But by having this riser here, it concentrates heat down in this area, makes this part of the casting freeze a little bit later than the rest. And feeder metal, you can see how the top of that riser is indented. That riser shouldn't be indented that much based on how it was originally cast. You can see that there is some indent there, but there's a little bit more here. That means that riser fed molten metal down into the casting just as it was cooling off, and that's its sole purpose. Is very important to have it there, because shrinks, as they call them, or shrink gaps, really are frustrating and essentially, in my case, in my opinion, ruin a casting.